Welcome to week 2 of Beyond Youth Investment. This week, we're going to talk about fear. When I was a little kid, I remember that I used to love space. I have a vivid memory of my dad and I spending hours using my tiny little telescope to look out my window at the moon. I loved the idea of the moon and the stars and all these incredible things that were beyond my imagination. That was until I realized that there were a lot of things beyond my imagination. I began to have all kinds of fear, anxiety, and dread about what was held beyond my planet. What was out there in space? What was going on? How big was it? It was much too big for me to imagine, and that scared me to death. To this day, I'm still not a big fan of space. I don't really like thinking about it or talking about it, but as much as this fear is real in the sense that space really is out there and it really is too big for me to imagine, it's fairly irrational. There is a very slim chance in my life of me ever having to confront my fear, to face it in a real way. I will go on about my day, not even giving it a second thought. Research is increasingly showing that fear is not that way for Generation Z. Generation Z is experiencing fear much more similarly to the way that we as adults do. The more rational kinds, I mean. They're afraid of many similar things, but they don't quite understand all of the things that we do. They don't have the same coping mechanisms and strategies to just go about their days in the ways that we've learned to. Generation Z is reporting higher levels of stress, anxiety, and generalized fear than any other generation. And in many cases, we're not helping to resolve it. We asked a collection of Generation Zs from across Ontario about what they were most afraid of. Their answers fell into 5 main categories. The first, FOMO, the fear of missing out, which might seem to fall into the irrational, silly category of fear. But this fear is quite motivating. This is the kind of thing that will cause your student, your child, or your teen to get overwhelming anxiety about going to school the next day. They'll be worried about getting bullied for not participating in a particular event. They'll be worried about looking stupid for not understanding a certain topic. There are all kinds of ways that FOMO and the fear of missing out on life can impact our youth on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be relational or social. This fear can actually be related to the future as well. Students that are older, maybe in high school, can be worried about attending university. What will that look like? What if I can't go? What if I attend college instead? Does that make me less than? What if I decide not to go to university or college or any form of post-secondary at all? Does that mean that I am not as good as my peers? These kinds of fears drive our youth and cause them greater stress than we can possibly understand. The second fear is fear of financial instability. The youth of today understand what financial instability looks like more than we give them credit. They have been able to watch their parents and family members and friends and neighbors and all kinds of adults and members of authority in their lives go through a recession, multiple in fact, and they've seen the way that has impacted their lives on a daily basis. These students do not want to be in that same position. Generation Z has a greater awareness of what healthy spending and healthy saving habits look like. And this is key to understanding why they spend their money in the ways that they do, and why they're more likely to ask their parents for money than to want to spend their own. Number 3, the fear of political uncertainty. As a result of all kinds of factors, specifically related to news and social media, Gen Z is much more aware of politics in general than many generations gone by. They're engaged and asking questions that past generations didn't ask until they were much older. Political engagement within this demographic is on the rise as this fear continues to drive, motivate, and strengthen this generation to make change for the future. Number 4, fear of future doom. This might seem a little bit ambiguous, but really, that's intentional. There are all kinds of uncertainties, giant question marks over this world right now. Whether it's as a result of this latest pandemic or climate change, maybe it has to do with wars between or in foreign nations, Generation Z is tuned in. They're aware of these horrifying events going on around the world, and they're afraid of them. They don't want these epidemics to continue. They don't want this to be their future, and they're afraid that it will be. As a result of the limited power that they have due to their age and other factors, these students are living in a state of powerless fear. Generation Z is more aware and less equipped to do anything about any of these events going on around the world. Number 5, general uncertainty and instability. This topic might seem similar to some of the other fears that we've already talked about. But this one is more in line with the current mental health crisis that's going on. There are unprecedented rates of teen suicide, anxiety, depression, and all kinds of other mental illness issues that are going on in our students. Many would suggest that this is a result of greater awareness and thus greater reporting, but if you look further into the research, we can see that these rates are actually related to greater feelings of stress that are foundational for each of these issues. While not all individuals are receiving diagnoses for these particular struggles, feelings of deep sadness, fear, or worry have a serious impact on their day-to-day lives. One of the most harmful and unproductive things that we can do as leaders is to minimize and discredit those fears. They're afraid of these things because they're real, and we would be lying if we said we'd never experienced them ourselves. It is important that we give credit to our students and acknowledge that the fears they have are not their fault, that we don't put them in a position of feeling guilty on top of feeling afraid. When we use language that dismisses the experience of our students, we stop being a safe place for them to come and bring those fears to our attention. As a youth investor, we should always be striving to be a safe place for our students. Now, there's another way to look at fear in the way that we interact with our students, and that is with what I like to call fear-driving vocabulary. Fear-driving vocabulary is what happens when you as an individual have a gut reaction. For example, your student tells you something. Maybe they've made a bad choice. They've connected with a friend who will probably have a negative influence. They've been investigating things that could have a negative impact on their mental health, spiritual health, emotional health, or just general well-being. In those moments, as a youth investor, your gut reaction is to probably tell them, stop that, don't do it. I will tell you from experience, it's not going to be good for you. The problem is that this language does not infuse a sense of trust or hope into our students. Instead, it lets them know that there are things to be afraid of in this world and that they can't handle them. While this might be true, that there are many things in life that they are not equipped to handle for good reason, it's not helpful to communicate that without hearing the exploration going on from their perspective. Instead of simply shutting down all forms of conversation or hearing out their side of the story, it's much better to engage in a different kind of way. If you're not sure exactly what I mean, here's a helpful way of thinking of this. Think of your words as a vehicle. Consider where you or your student is currently parked, maybe in a state of anxiety, overwhelm, curiosity, or any other kind of emotion. It's important that we first examine what this parking space looks like, the current vehicle that we're sitting in. By understanding where we are, we can then move forward to know where we're hoping to go. If we don't want to be anxious anymore, that might be a really important place to go. If we're feeling curious and we want to understand some things that we don't yet have familiarity with, that might be something to investigate. There are all kinds of ways of answering this question, but it's important that you talk with the student about where it is they'd like to go instead of answering this question for them. The third step is to imagine what it might look like to get from the current parking spot that you're in to that place that you've identified as wanting to go to. There might be obstacles along the road, including friends with negative influence or financial barriers. There could be some bumps and pit stops, maybe some times that you want to turn around and go back to that initial parking spot. But it's important that we talk through those things in advance, determine the best route, and then take the plunge together. Get in the car with your student, figuratively, and engage with them. Take this road with them. Allow them to ask those questions, to prepare themselves, and to finally arrive to where they are hoping to be. For example, say your student comes to you and tells you that they are feeling incredibly anxious. Your first step, examine where you're parked. Ask the student what it's like to feel anxious. What are they anxious about? What kinds of thoughts go through their head at times of high anxiety? What kinds of things do they do right now to manage that anxiety? Allow them to explore that emotional state with you, and don't try and answer the questions for them. Number 2, where are they hoping to go? Perhaps they're really anxious about the future. They're maybe preparing to go off to post-secondary education, and they're feeling really overwhelmed at the prospect of making a really big decision. So, where do they want to go? They want to go to a place of peace about their future. So talk about what that might look like. What will it feel like to have peace about your future? What kinds of decisions do you need to make in order to arrive at that peace? Who needs to be involved in this journey? Again, don't answer these questions for them, but instead walk with them in the pursuit of these answers. Number 3, what's the best route of getting there? How can we go from our current state of anxiety to that destination of peace? What are the obstacles we might face along the way? What kinds of snacks do we need to prepare for the road? Who do we need to bring with us? There are all kinds of different things that you can ask in this case, and I would encourage you, let them know that you are willing to go along that journey with them. Sometimes that's the most helpful thing. Finally, instead of allowing our own fear to drive our conversations, we need to be mindful of the state of fear that Generation Z is already facing. We need to give them credit for the fears that they're having and work to minimize them while still taking them seriously. By being intentional about the way we communicate and investigate some of these overwhelming feelings, we can establish a healthy relationship with our students and direct them closer to God throughout it all. Hopefully, at the end of the day, you will be able to get them past their fear, at least to a degree, and provide them with some helpful coping strategies that will encourage them instead of discourage them about the future.